Hello and welcome back to Bookish and welcome to Faulkner in August 2021. This year's Faulkner in August novel is Sanctuary, and this week we read chapters 1 through 8. By the way, if you'd like to join us for Faulkner in August and reading Sanctuary, it's not too late to join in. I'll post a link to the video with the schedule and kind of introducing the hosts at the end of the video, and you can click on that. And if you want to join our Voxer group, I'll leave my Voxer handle down below and you're welcome to join in. It's not too late. I will warn you that if you're on Voxer and you join our group, you probably should turn notifications off, because a lot of people are saying a lot of great stuff over there and we're having a good time, so feel free to join in. So what I like to do in these videos for Faulkner in August is basically just go over the reading each week. And so this was the first week's reading, and we covered chapters 1 through 8. So I'm just going to real quickly try to summarize the plot and kind of what's going on, and hopefully kind of clarify a few things as we move on. So Sanctuary starts with a meeting between a character named Horace Benbow, who is a lawyer who is essentially escaping from his family, from his wife and her and his stepdaughter, and an unhappy situation, and he's on his way to Jefferson, Mississippi, which is an important city in Faulkner's Yoknapatawpha County, to visit his sister Narcissa and his aunt Jenny, and that's where he's headed. Along the way, he stops along the road and goes out in the woods to drink from a stream. He's hot, he's thirsty, so he goes out to drink from a stream, which he's heard, and there he is confronted by a man dressed in a black suit, a man with, a colorless kind of face who is very threatening, who's just watching him drink, and it becomes clear that this man, who we will find out is a character named Popeye, is a menacing, threatening, gangster kind of a character, and he more or less forces Horace Benbow to go back to the old decaying mansion house where a bootlegging operation is being run by a man named Lee Goodwin, who inherited it from his father, and this home is populated then by a group of bootleggers and gangsters. Popeye is a menacing character. He is a bad guy from the moment go. He has a gun. He thinks Horace has a gun, which is actually a book. Because Horace has a book, Popeye and the others call him the professor when he sits down to eat dinner with them at the mansion. When Horace gets to the mansion, we are introduced to other important characters who will show up in these first 8 chapters. There's Ruby, who is Lee Goodwin's common-law wife, who has relatively recently given birth to their child, and I'll talk more about Ruby later. She's there taking care of and cooking and doing the cleaning. Lee Goodwin's there. Popeye, who is there also and a part of this kind of bootlegging gang, even though it's clear that Popeye is not comfortable in the country. When Horace first meets him, Popeye puts down a handkerchief when he squats down near the stream so he doesn't get the heels of his shoes dirty. And Popeye is clearly not comfortable out in the country. He seems like a city gangster. He can't identify birdsong as Horace can, and Horace points this out to him. And he is scared by an owl in the dark as he leads Horace back to the mansion. But he's still a tough, scary bad guy, but he's clearly out of place. And then there's also Tommy, a young man who works for Lee Goodwin in this bootlegging operation, who is mentally impaired in some way. There's Lee Goodwin's father, who's deaf and blind. And I believe we also meet Van, who is kind of a tough guy who works for Lee Goodwin. Benbow sits down and eats dinner with him. He is in some danger because, Popeye is worried he's going to divulge the location of their bootlegging operation, but they eventually let Horace Benbow ride on a truck that goes to Jefferson on its way to Memphis with the delivery of the moonshine that they've been making. This is during Prohibition in the United States of America, so they're hoping to profit from that in the way in which we think of 1920s gangsters. Horace makes his way to his sister's house. We meet Narcissa, we meet Aunt Jenny, and we also meet a young man character who's there, who will be really, really important to the rest of the action of the plot. His name is Gowan Stevens. He goes to the University of Virginia. He considers himself to be a gentleman. He's a snob and a dandy. He's also a fall-down drunk. He is supposed to go the next day to meet a young woman named Temple Drake, who is taking a train from Oxford, Mississippi, where she's a student at the University of Mississippi, down to Starkville to watch a baseball game between the University of Mississippi and Mississippi State University, and he is going to meet her, and she's going to ride in his car alone, scandalous, without a chaperone, down to Starkville. This will mean that Temple is breaking the rules, but as we will find out, Temple oftentimes breaks the rules. So Gowan's supposed to meet her, but of course he gets drunk and he's passed out and he misses the train, and then he rushes to catch up with the train and he meets Temple and they get in his car and they head off towards Starkville together. Now Temple Drake is an incredibly attractive young woman with, I believe, red hair who draws the attention of almost every man that sees her. She goes out with young men who are townspeople in Oxford, Mississippi, much to the chagrin of the college men at the University of Oxford, who she also goes out with. And, you know, she likes to break the rules. She likes to get in a little bit of trouble. And she's decided that she's going to get off the train, break the rules, and drive to Starkville with Gowan Stevens. As soon as she gets to the car, she realizes that he's drinking, that he is in fact drunk, which he is. On the way down to Starkville, he decides to have to take a detour so he can buy more whiskey, in this case moonshine, and of course he knows about Lee Goodwin's bootlegging operation, so he takes a turn off the highway down a road to go to the house where Lee Goodwin, this mansion where Lee Goodwin operates his moonshining business. And unbeknownst to him, Popeye, who's gotten in on this bootlegging business with Lee Goodwin, I assume is kind of the city connection, the city gangster connection to bootlegging during Prohibition. Popeye has ordered Tommy to cut down a tree to block the path to the house. Gowan Stevens, who's drunk, drives his car directly into the tree, wrecks his car, injures himself a little bit, and Temple is thrown from the car. And now we see Temple Drake isolated out in the woods in the scary old decaying mansion, surrounded by criminal men of various levels of terrifyingness. There's Tommy. Well, I should first say there's Gowan, who you would think would be her protector, and occasionally he interjects and tries to protect her honor and dignity, but he's drunk all the time, and she realizes he's not going to help her. There's Tommy, the mentally impaired young man, who is definitely sympathetic and wants to protect Temple, but she learns really quickly that he can't. There's Ruby, the woman I mentioned before, who lives in the house and is Lee Goodwin's common-law wife, and it's Ruby's presence which reassures Temple about the safety of going to the house enough that she's actually able to be coaxed inside. There's Van, who's a rough character. There's Lee Goodwin, who himself is a rough character, as we'll find out later on. And then there's Popeye, who is the essence of menace. Temple is scared from the beginning, but at first she's just kind of scared of Popeye. Then she's scared in kind of creeped out way of Lee Goodwin's father, who's deaf and blind, and then she becomes increasingly scared for her situation. As it becomes clear that Gowan is just going to get drunk and she's going to be stuck in this place overnight, she becomes increasingly terrified. And the menace grows, and she is definitely in danger. She has a conversation with Ruby, which I'll talk about in more detail in just a little bit, because I think that's the best part of these first 8 chapters. And then she goes to bed in one of the bedrooms in the mansion. She attempts to kind of get into a normal routine, but she knows she's in danger. She is afraid, and she has reason to be. The men will break into the room. Van essentially almost disrobes her and leaves her standing in her underwear. He is beaten down by Lee Goodwin, who you might think is going to protect her, but he really probably isn't. And then there's always the threat of Popeye. And so now we see exactly how much trouble Temple Drake is in out here in this isolated, crumbling, ruined mansion with no protection and alone with these desperate criminal element men. And that's kind of where Chapter 8 leaves off. What I think is the best part of chapters 1 through 8, and in some ways, I suspect what I'll find to be the best part of the books in general, are the exchanges that take place between Ruby and Temple. And this is all Chapter 7 is. So it's what I'm going to spend most of my time on. To me, this is the best part of the book. Faulkner has been accused of misogyny for the way in which he treats and portrays Temple in this book, and Ruby is in some ways a counterpoint to that. And I think Ruby's presence really kind of makes us question what Faulkner was up to, and is he doing something intentionally with the juxtaposition of Ruby and Temple, or is it unintentional? Is this an occasion where, me as a 20th, 21st century reader am projecting something onto Ruby that really isn't there? But Ruby has led a rough life. She didn't start off this way. She came from a good family. Her father objected to her first boyfriend, lover, and killed him, and then he kicked her out of his house. She then became involved in prostitution in, I believe, Memphis, Tennessee, and I think we'll find out that's where she met Popeye. She also then meets Lee Goodwin there and becomes involved with him. And over the course of her conversation with Temple, she goes from being incredibly angry to being afraid of Temple to perhaps offering Temple a way out. And so we're kind of throughout chapter 7, we're left with this idea or wondering, is Ruby going to help Temple? Is she going to help Temple perhaps avoid the very life that Ruby finds herself in? Or does Ruby view Temple as such a threat that she's not going to help her? This is a very, I think, complicated relationship, and Ruby says some terrible, awful, misogynist things to Temple. And so the question we have is she speaking out of fear? Is she speaking out of anger? Is Faulkner doing this on purpose, putting the misogynistic words and phrases in the mouth of a woman to blunt their effect or to make their effect more powerful? Lots of questions about this, but I thought I would read you some of the sections of this conversation, not all of it, because like I said, it is chapter 7, because I think this is an example of how good Faulkner can be at direct dialogue, which is not something I think we associate with William Faulkner all the time. But here we go, and I'll just start off by reading the first section. By the way, during most of chapter 7, Temple is holding Ruby and Lee Goodwin's baby in her arms, and Ruby is going to essentially tell Temple how much trouble she's in. She's going to tell her what she thinks about Temple. She's going to tell part of her own backstory, and she's going to let Temple have it and then perhaps give Temple a way out. So this is Ruby talking to Temple. "Oh, I know your sort," the woman said. "Honest woman. Too good to have anything to do with common people. You'll slip out at night with the kids, but just let a man come along." She turned the meat. "Take all you can get and give nothing. I'm a pure girl. I don't do that. You'll slip out with the kids and burn their gasoline and eat their food, but just let a man so much as look at you and you faint away because your father the judge and your 4 brothers might not like it. But just let you get into a jam, then who do you come crying to? To us, the ones that are not good enough to lace the judge's almighty shoes." Across the child, Temple gazed at the woman's back, her face like a small pale mask beneath the precarious hat. So that's Temple essentially telling, that's Ruby telling Temple what she thinks of her. She goes on then, on the next page to continue. "But you good women, cheap sports, giving nothing, then when you're caught, do you know what you've gotten into now?" She looked across her shoulder, the fork in her hand. "Do you think you're meeting kids now? Kids that give a damn whether you like it or not? Let me tell you whose house you've come into without being asked or wanted, who you're expecting to drop everything and carry you back where you had no business ever leaving. When he was a soldier in the Philippines, he killed another soldier over one of those blank women they sent him to Leavenworth. Then the war came and they let him out to go to it. He got 2 medals, and when it was over, they put him back in Leavenworth until the lawyer got a congressman to get him out. Then I could quit jazzing again." "Jazzing?" Temple whispered, holding the child, looking herself no more than an elongated, leggy infant in her scant dress and up-tilted hat. "Yes, putty-face," the woman said. "How do you suppose I paid that lawyer? And that's the sort of man you think will care that much?" With the fork in her hand, she came and snapped her fingers softly and viciously in Temple's face. "What happens to you? And will care that much what happens to you? And you little doll-faced slut that think you can come into a room where a man is without him?" Beneath the faded garment, her breast moved deep and full. With her hands on her hips, she looked at Temple with cold, blazing eyes. "Man, you've never seen a real man. You don't know what it is to be wanted by a real man. And thank your stars you haven't and never will, for then you'd find out what that little putty face is worth, and all the rest of it You think you're jealous of what you're just scared of. And if he's man enough to call you whore, you'll say yes, yes, and you'll crawl naked into the dirt and the mire for him to call you that. That's, pretty rough stuff for the 1930s. But then later, Ruby seems to soften, and she says, "Listen, if I get a car for you, will you get out of here?" she said, staring at her. Temple moved her mouth as though she were experimenting with words, tasting them. "Will you go out the back and get into it and go away and never come back here?" "Yes," Temple whispered. "Anywhere, anything." Without seeming to move her cold eyes at all, the woman looked Temple up and down. Temple could feel all her muscles shrinking like severed vines in the noon sun. "You poor little gutless fool," the woman said in her cold undertone, "playing at it." I didn't. "You'll have something to tell them when you get back, won't you?" Face to face, their voices were like shadows upon two close blank walls. "Playing at it." "Anything, just so I can get away. Anywhere. It's not Lee I'm afraid of. Do you think he plays the dog after every hot little blank that comes along? It's you." "Yes, I'll go anywhere." "I know your sort. I've seen them, all running but not too fast, not so fast you can't tell a real man when you see him. Do you think you've got the only one in the world?" "Gowan," Temple whispered. "Gowan." "I have slaved for that man," the woman whispered, her lips scarce moving, in her still dispassionate voice. It was as though she were reciting formula for bread. "I worked night shift as a waitress so I could see him Sundays at the prison. I lived 2 years in a single room cooking over a gas jet because I promised him. I lied to him and made money to get him out of prison, and when I told him how I made it, he beat me. And now you must come here where you're not wanted. Nobody asked you to come here. Nobody cares whether you're afraid or not. Afraid? You haven't the guts to be really afraid any more than you have to be in love." "I'll pay you," Temple whispered. "Anything you say. My father will give it to me." So here we see what I think Ruby's motivation really is. She's afraid that she's going to lose Lee. She says she's not, but she clearly is. She sees Temple as a threat. Her life is not good. Her life is terrible. Her clothes are faded. Her underwear has to be mended. She is in contrast to the beautiful, well-made-up, well-clothed Temple. And Ruby knows she should have some pity for Temple, but she can't find it because of what she sees in Temple, or maybe how she sees Temple was like her. And she sees that Temple, because she's so attractive, might be a threat to whatever life she has with Lee, whatever life Ruby has with Lee, and she thinks, I need to get this woman out of here or I'm going to lose my common law husband and the father of my child, and then where will I be? There's actually an allusion earlier on, where Popeye suggests she might have to go back to a life of prostitution. This is a woman who has prostituted herself for this man, and now Temple represents a threat, and she thinks, I need to get this woman out of this house. She's acting to save herself, perhaps, and not so much Temple, even though I don't think she's completely without sympathy for Temple's situation. But in the end, Ruby says there is no car. And she's not going to get away. And this scene to me is like the most tense scene and the most well-realized scene. And in lots of ways, really the most interesting scene. This interaction between Ruby and Temple. Of all the characters so far in the novel, Ruby is the one, I think, maybe in Horace Benbow, who are the most fully realized, who are the most real, whose motivations we understand the best. And one of the questions I have for people who read this, and I'll ask this in the Voxer group here as soon as I finish filming this, is a lot of people in the Voxer group, myself included, we feel the tension, we fear for Temple, we have sympathy for her situation, we realize the danger she's in before maybe even she does. Why don't we have the same sympathy for Ruby? Why is Ruby not mentioned, and why is Ruby not the person we focus on and her situation? To me, Chapter 7 is the best part of these first 8 chapters, and Chapter 8 is the worst. Here we see, Temple behaving irrationally and strangely, which is, I think, as people in the Voxer group have pointed out, is understandable for a girl in her position, seeking some kind of comfort and routine, but at the same time knowing she's in danger and in some ways trying to, shield herself from that. And here we see the men break in and there's violence. And to be honest with you, I don't think this is what Faulkner does best. I think these scenes where the men are menacing Temple in all these different ways, I think they're not particularly well rendered. I think they're a little bit too long. I think we got the point, and to me, Chapter 8 is, while an important chapter, it's not that you can cut the whole thing out. I don't think this writing these action scenes where one man beats up another to get a shot at Temple Drake, at assaulting Temple Drake, I don't think that particularly is handled well by Faulkner. I don't think he describes action in a room particularly well, and so to me that's the weakest chapter. So Chapter 7 the strongest, Chapter 8 the weakest. Anyway, there you go. There's my wrap up of week 1 reading of Sanctuary for Faulkner in August 2021. I look forward to the comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.